All right, hello again. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit more about JavaScript. Yay. This time we're going to talk about some characteristics of it, some general things about it, and also JavaScript objects a little bit, and then we'll do a couple little fun, hopefully fun little scripts on this guy. So just to notice before we start, there's a couple of styles up here in the head called weird and regular. So we're going to write a little script that changes the page styles to these styles using a little radio button. It'll be super cool. All right, so I'm going to close this sidebar. Hopefully I gave you guys this file, or else it's going to be very hard to do. So let me close that so we have some more space. And then I'm going to open this page. Let me get rid of this window here. I'm going to open this page in the using live server, and it's preview there. So some of this is just some information about JavaScript that we'll kind of go through, things that you should probably know about it. So JavaScript typically is considered an interpreted language and not a compiled language, but it actually goes through a combination of interpretation and compilation during its execution. What does that mean? So when something is compiled, it's turned into machine code before it's when it's saved as, or when it's turned into a program, for example. But interpreted means it's just read by a parser or something that reads it. So some parts of code in JavaScript might be compiled behind the scenes a little bit, but it's an interpreted language for many operations, which again means it's read line by the JavaScript interpreter in small chunks and then executed as it goes. So you can kind of think of it that way, even though technically there is some compilation that goes on. But think of it as being read line by line and processed line by line. It is case sensitive. So if you name something, say field box, like a function, which we're going to do in a little bit. If you name something with field box with a capital B, when you reference that that function later, it has to have a capital B again. So this is case sensitive. Just remember that. A little bit like CSS and HTML, so white space, extra tabs, extra spaces, that kind of thing is ignored unless it's part of a string. A string is a text object. Typically, you can think of it as text most of the time, and it's going to be enclosed in quotes. So if it's not part of a string, it's going to extra white space and tabs and things are going to be ignored. So a script is made up of statements, which you can think of as kind of commands to tell the browser what to do, such as alert. I think you may have already seen this one. So this causes an alert window or message to pop up that says thank you. And then that's one statement. And then you'll see the end of a statement has a semicolon right there, right? So that tells the JavaScript that that's the end of that command, basically. You could, I think, theoretically just put in a line break, and JavaScript will take that as the end of a statement, but you want to use the semicolon at the end of them, basically. I think you already saw this probably too, but just as a refresher, so single lines in JavaScript start with 2 slashes. That means it's all on one line. So JavaScript interpreter will ignore everything after those slashes until it reaches the end of a line. If you want to do multi-line comments, you can use star and then, or a slash and then asterisk, and then if you want to end it, you will put asterisk and slash, just like in CSS. So that's kind of good. It's very similar to CSS that way, both of those actually. Variables, we're going to use, I don't know if we're going to use variables in this one, but just to mention variables. Variables are sort of containers that you can use to store information or a value. And you'll see more stuff on variables later, but JavaScript uses the same rules as C, the language C, where variable names can use letters, digits, or underscores. For example, here is creating a variable called A, just the letter A, and assigning it a value of 5. So this is a line or a JavaScript statement that says create a variable, and there's other ways to create variables too, besides using the var keyword, but there's others like let and things like that. But that creates a variable called named A and then sets its value to 5. Variables in JavaScript can change type dynamically. What does that mean? In Java, C, and C++, things like that, variables are tightly typed, which means they have a certain they're a certain type of variable, and an example would be an integer, which is a number or a string. They can't change type after being assigned. In JavaScript, they can. So you could change an integer, and a variable can hold an integer at one time, and then it can hold a string at another time. Integer is a number, string is a text object, basically, some text, right? All quotation marks must be in pairs. A single and double quote must have a corresponding single and double quote. You'll see that when we do the scripts here in a second. You got to alternate so that JavaScript knows what quote goes with what end quote, what opening quote goes with what ending quote. JavaScript can perform actions on various objects in a document. So we're talking a little bit about objects now, like images, buttons, links, other objects. So everything on your in your page is going to be there's going to be an object. That thing is an object, right? JavaScript operates in a world of objects. An object can be a button, a form, a document, or your document, window, the browser window, many other things. Objects also have methods, properties such as methods, colors, values, IDs, location on screen within a window. What does that all mean? So, for example, like if you think about a coin has certain characteristics like the shape or the color or the thickness or the weight. Or the type of image on it, right? Those are characteristics of a coin. So those would be properties. Yeah, and then methods are things that do things to objects. So one thing that I don't think I have on here, but it's a good way to kind of remember it, is objects are kind of like the nouns, the things on your page. Methods are the verbs that do something to your object. A lot of times you're going to change the properties. Properties are things about your object. So you'll see that a little better when we do some examples. It'll make more sense. So JavaScript built-in, if you understand JavaScript built-in objects can help you identify relationships between objects on your code. The ID attribute is something you can use when creating documents to identify objects, right? We've used the ID attribute before already. We use it with CSS. So when you use the ID attribute, you're basically naming or identifying. That's what ID stands for, right? You're identifying something, and IDs are used. That property, that ID, is used in JavaScript as well to sort of access it. You got to name it to be able to access it, right? How are you going to tell JavaScript what thing you want to manipulate, what thing you want to change? So every time you're a JavaScript enabled browser, which is pretty much all of them at this point. Unless people turn it off. Some people supposedly do turn off JavaScript, but most of the time it's going to create objects corresponding to the page. So you get some automatically created objects, but you can also create your own too. So objects can originate from many sources. They're built into the JavaScript language, like the browser window, the web page, the forms on your page, windows, links, those are all objects. You can also create your own objects. You can also use objects created by others. For example, like if you use a JavaScript library, there may be objects created by some scripts or some code in that library. All right, enough talking. Let's actually do something. So here we've got, we're going to use a JavaScript to do a rollover. And you guys all probably know this, but what a rollover is when I roll the mouse over it's going to change. We're going to change it. So what do we do? How are we going to use JavaScript to change that? We're going to change something about this object. What are we going to change? We're going to change the source of the file. So scroll down in your code. We finally get to do something here. It's about line 107 there. And then it says add code to the following line on line 112. So I'm actually going to make this bigger because it gets awkward and I want to keep the text big enough for you guys to see it. So it says image ID equals rollover image. So there we're using the ID to name that image object. So that is an object. And then it has a source. That's a property of the object. Does it say that one? Yeah. And then we've got image/off.jpg. That image is already there. That's that one. That's off. And then it has an alt, right? So we're going to add some code in here to do some JavaScript, right? So we're going to say right after that, it says alt equals off. Go ahead and put on mouse over. So thankfully, VS Code knows a lot of this JavaScript, right? So we're going to put on mouse over. And then let me just put the rest of this in here and then we'll talk about it. I'm going to type change image. Oops. Change. If I could type, get out of the way. Can't see what I'm doing. Change image with a capital I. And then I'm going to put some parentheses there. And then I'm going to put a space after that, after the closing quote there. And I'm going to put on mouse out. See, now I'm having trouble typing because I got flustered. On mouse out equals restore image with a capital I. And then parentheses. So what are we doing here? So let me explain this a little bit. So on mouse over is an event handler. An event handler is something that will react to an event. What's the event? On mouse over is the event. And you see if I roll over it, it tells me what it is in VS Code. So when I roll over this, that causes that event to happen. And then what we want to happen is after the equal sign. So that means if I roll my mouse over this image object, I want this to happen. This is a function that we're going to define actually down here. And then when we roll the mouse out or off of this image, we want to run this function, which is called a restore image. By the way, this is using something called camel case. With the capital I, you'll see sometimes code is written that way. It looks like two words, right? Restore image or change image. But the second word is capitalized, so it makes it a little easier to read. But it does have to match. It's case sensitive, remember? So when we use these words again, we got to make sure they're the same. Okay, so let's go down here, and it says add code here. Now we're going to define our function. We're going to say function, and then a space, and then change image. And you can see the change image is already in there because VS Code already knows that we use that. And I don't know why there's a 0 in there, but I'm going to put in my parentheses, and then I'm going to put my curly braces. So even though this looks a little bit like CSS, it's not. This is a completely different language. So what we're doing here is we're defining this function called change image, and that's what happens. What change image is going to go in between here. So what is a function? A function is sort of a reusable little process or a little piece of code that you can reuse. So when you define a function, you can reuse it. Sort of like I can reuse CSS classes, sort of like that, right? So once we define this function, we could use it multiple times if we wanted to. So what happens with change image goes in between the curly braces. So what do we want to happen? We want to say document and dot get element by ID. And I'm going to type this and then I'll explain it at the end because I probably will lose track here if I don't do it that way. So I'm going to put rollover image, rollover dash image. And then after the parentheses, I'm going to say dot source, and then an equals, and then a single quote. I'm going to say image / on dot jpg. And then that's the end of that guy. So I'm going to put a semicolon. So let me copy and paste that and make a couple changes, and then I'll go back and talk about it a little bit. So I'm going to copy that. Remember, if you're copying and pasting, right, you guys know this. If I made a mistake in here, which I don't think I did, it is going to copy and paste your mistake. So now you have 2 mistakes. So just be careful. So I'm going to say function, and this second function is called restore image. It's the same what we used before, and you see it's right there, right? So here's restore image, here's change image. If I select this or click up here in VS Code, it also highlights it here, and that tells me that I did that right? And then same thing here. If I click on restore image, it highlights that one. That means that we have matching names. So those names do have to match. The thing that I do have to change is right here where it says source. This is supposed to be off.jpg. Okay, so let's go back and talk about what's going on here. So document is an object that is our web page, basically, our document. Get element by ID is a method we can use to access something by its ID. So get element by ID, it's kind of like what it sounds like. We're going to access the thing that has an ID of rollover image. What has the ID of rollover image? This image. Oh, yeah. So, and then we've got dot source. So this is called dot notation, by the way. It's kind of an address to something. So we've got our document, and then we've got something on it called rollover image, and then we've got the source of that. So source is a property. Source is a property of this object here, this guy, which is our rollover image. So here's the source right here. Here's our original source, right? Right there, source equals. So that's this. This source is this source. So what we're doing with this line here is we're saying we want to find something in our document called rollover image and set its source. So the equal actually sets its source, sets the source of that object to on.jpg. It's in the image folder. You already have it. Hopefully I gave it to you. Yes, I did. I'm good that way, I think. And then, so that sets it to on.jpg. And then when we run the restore image function, so when does that run? That runs when we do on mouse out. It says restore image, right? So that means, run this function. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to set the source, but we're going to set the source back to off. So we started with off right there. We want to set it back to off, or else it would stick that way. We don't want it to stick. We want it to go back to off. So let's see if this actually works. It does work. We did some JavaScript. So basically when I roll over this, it says on mouse over. It runs that change image function, which sets the source to, let me move this over a little bit, sets the source to on.gif, or JPEG, I keep saying GIF. And then when we roll out, that uses the on mouse out event handler. An event handler is the on mouse over and on mouse out. Those are events, right? The mouse goes over or out of something, and then it resets it back to off, which is our original. That's how you do a rollover with JavaScript. You're basically changing a property of this object. The property is the source. That's what we're doing. That's all there is to it on that one. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so let's go down. We got a little bit more talking to do. Sorry about that. So we've been using what's called the document object model, which is a convention for representing objects in HTML, XHTML, XML. We're really only worried about HTML in this one. This definition is from Wikipedia, by the way. So the nodes of every document are organized into sort of a tree structure called the DOM tree, which I have an illustration down here helpfully for you. Objects in the DOM tree may be addressed and manipulated by using methods on the object. We just did that. We used a method. Methods are the verbs, right? So basically the DOM serves as a map to all the elements on the page so we can do things to them. So when your page is created, it creates this sort of document tree, which is kind of like an outline, basically is an outline, right? And then you can access all the things in that tree and change them. So you change properties or whatever you want to do to them. So in that DOM hierarchy, an object, this is where it gets a little confusing. An object's descendants are properties of the object. So that means that this heading or this H1 is a object, but it's also a property of the body. And it gets a little bit weird, but. So for example, if you have a form named form1, it's an object as well as a property of the document. And it's referred to as document.form1. That's that dot notation thing. So that means we have a document, and on that document we have something called form1, which is the form. If you wanted to access the value of a field on that form, it might look, here's kind of the dot notation for that. And it's kind of like an address, right? So we've got our web page document. We have a form on there, whatever the name of that form is. And then we have the name of the field. That's the ID. There's an ID that names the form. There's an ID that names the field in this case. And then value is a property of that. Value is whatever was in that field. So that's the value of it. So you're mixing in objects and properties here. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense. Let's do one more script. That's more fun anyway, right? So here we've got a little form that what we're going to do is we're going to change the CSS class for the body, and it'll change the way this whole page looks. It's going to be crazy. You're going to think it's crazy. So here we've got a couple of radio buttons. They both have the same name because that's what you want with radio buttons. You only want to be able to select one. So I'm going to go in and add some code here. So I'm going to say on click. And then whatever we want to happen goes in the parentheses. We want to say document dot body dot class name. So VS Code knows all this stuff, so you don't have to remember all of it anymore. Equals, and then in single quotes, which is going to be weird to do, I'm going to put weird. Gotta make sure I get these single quotes right. There we go. And then a semicolon goes right there. Okay. Then here, I'll just do the second one and then I'll come back and talk about what's going on here. Let me do on click. And we're gonna say document dot body. It's the same thing. I could have copied and pasted it, but dot class name equals, and then in single quotes we're going to put regular, and a semicolon goes there. Right. So what are we doing here? So let me make this even wider so that you guys can maybe see it on one line. Yeah. So on click is our event handler. So we click on this first button. And that says weird next to it, by the way, right? And this says document.body.className equals weird. What does that mean? That means we are going to set, think of the equal sign as set. We're going to set the class name of the body in our document to weird. This means we're going to set, if we click on this button, we're going to set the class name of the body in our document to regular. So remember when we started out this video 6 hours ago? We started with these two guys. I'm going to zoom, sorry. Up to the top, we've got two classes called weird and regular. So when we click on these radio buttons, we're going to switch back and forth between setting the class name of the body to weird and then setting it to regular. Let's see if it works. We don't even know if it works. Ah, it does work. All right, so check this out. I gotta make this bigger so you can see what's going on. You can see it on your screen, but so here, if I click on regular, I've got a pink background now and regular text. That's what that regular style has at the top here. And if I click on weird, it changes the font on the body to Comic Sans, which you'd never do. I did it for Comic Effects. I use Comic Sans for Comic Effect. If you use Comic Sans, right, you guys know this. If you're a designer, you'll get mocked by other designers. But I wanted to do that to show you that we change the styles. We change the background color to red. That's too big. We change the background color to red. We change the font color to this purpley weird color. And then we change the font style, or we change the font to Comic Sans. So you can click on this and go back and forth. There you go. We're using JavaScript to manipulate our page. Pretty sweet, huh? All right. I know that was a lot, but hopefully that helps a little bit with some basic things about JavaScript and objects, and I will talk to you again later.